how can we amplify Black excellence and elevate Black employees all year long? PowerToFly is thrilled to welcome Dionna Smith, Global Head of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Thumbtack, for this impactful conversation with PowerToFly Global Director of DEI, our very own Sienna Brown. So Dionna and Sienna will discuss how leadership and professional development opportunities can amplify Black excellence, pitfalls to avoid when elevating Black employees, and how psychological safety can play a key role in performance and retention. And I will pass it over to you two. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Hunter, and welcome, Dionna. For those of you who are just tuning in, we are in for a treat. Dionna is a superstar, a mentor, a ray of light, and a wealth of knowledge. So I'm really excited to have you here today, Dionna. I'm excited for us to kick off this conversation. I guess I just want to dive right in. I just want you to give an introduction and let us know a little bit about you and the work that you do.
Absolutely. So Sienna, again, thank you so much. Always a pleasure to chat with you. So I'm excited about the next half hour as well. So my name is Dionna. Again, I lead diversity, equity, and inclusion at Thumbtack. We at Thumbtack, I have been at Thumbtack since October of 2020. So if you can kind of place yourself back in that time, kind of joins when there was a lot going on. And this conversation is right on with a lot of the conversations that we are having now as we see some of the aftermath of BLM beginning to subside a bit, and some folks kind of, it's becoming a distant memory. And so where we were a hot subject there for a while, it's starting to die down. So we're going to talk a little bit about how I personally am making sure that that doesn't happen, and how Thumbtack as a company has addressed that as well. Prior to joining Thumbtack, I had the great privilege of working with Sienna and PowerToFly, doing DEI consulting, training, learning and development. Learned a ton being at PowerToFly, and the great opportunity that we had to work with a number of different companies. And again, to be able to work with colleagues like Sienna, who are working so hard at this work, just like I am. So that was amazing. And prior to that, I had led DEI talent strategies at Delta Airlines and a number of other companies, mostly tech companies out of Atlanta. So really quickly, one of the things you asked about is just kind of entering the work that we're doing. So at Thumbtack right now, going into 2022, our mantra is going from awareness to action and accountability. So 2021 was definitely a year of responding, putting foundation down for a lot of companies, and Thumbtack was no different there. We're so excited rolling into 2022 now, though, as we see a great opportunity for us to put that learning and put those fundamentals into action plans. And we are thrilled. We actually have a DEI business partner model. And our goal is to enable our leaders and our employees to feel empowered, to see themselves as change makers. DEI does not sit in the DEI group. It is all of us, as well as ensuring that we are supporting and developing and advocating for folks from backgrounds that have been traditionally excluded at Thumbtack. So we're just excited about the work that we're going to do. We have a lot of hard work ahead of us, but we are fired up and ready to go.
And what better leader with you in charge, Dionna? I mean, I think it's amazing to just hear about all the work that you've done, obviously in the past, but up until now, and the way that you're framing it of it's exciting how much is ahead. Because again, I think that that's something that's so important for all companies to realize, that this isn't a one and done type game, right? But this is something that will take hard work and dedication across a long amount of time. So I love it. I mean, let's dive into a little bit about the conversation today, which is Black excellence and the celebration of Black excellence in everyday life, right? And so I think that it's really important to focus on that and how it helps accentuate the importance of marginalized culture. So let's talk about a little bit about it, especially just because I love your point of view of how we tell Black stories, what Black excellence actually looks like. So.
Absolutely. I love this question because I think sometimes in the workplace, we focus all of our attention on, sometimes race relations or uplifting, just in the context of work. If there's nothing else we've realized over the last few years that, we are bringing our full selves to work. And the folks that come to work are the people who are affected by the things that are happening in their everyday life or have happened in their background. When we think about diverse teams, everyone knows, there's enough data out there to support that diverse teams outperform teams that are not diverse. So we know that. But we've also got to be real about the fact that it does add a layer of complexity. When you are working with people who are just like you, same background, same schools, et cetera, there's just a familiarity that makes certain things easier, right? Or feel easier in the beginning. So oftentimes those homogeneous teams in the beginning, they can move faster, which when I think about, my companies in Silicon Valley and the startup, they moved faster because there wasn't a whole lot of other, going on. But we know long-term that's not the most effective way, but it's the reason why a lot of places and people have just kind of rested there where they're comfortable.
Yeah.
That being said, it also brings me to the point that oftentimes our family, our close friends, et cetera, are usually very similar to us as well. So when we think about like our unconscious bias, and Sienna, I'm big on our conscious biases also, things that we've just accepted that we're biased about and we're like, oh, well. But many of those are formed, if you're not having personal relationships with people, it's often really, really heavily influenced by the media. Unfortunate for us, yeah. Our portrayals in the media are not usually positive. They're portraying Black men as criminals, as violent, portraying Black women, low moral, high sexuality, showing our children and our teenagers as threats to society, et cetera. So if you don't have any other outside influences, that's what's forming that part in our brain that allows us to put people in boxes, right? And so the only way we start to move or change that is by not only developing personal relationships when you can, that's the most effective way, but also making sure that we're being exposed to not just these negative images, but that we are able to see Black excellence. So what does that look like? And like, what does that do to the brain, right? So if you think about it, in our brain, we've placed people in boxes. It keeps us safe. It's our go-to, right? And Sienna, that was all about this. I love one of the trainings you do that like digs
teach
into
us, teach them, Dionna, let's do it.
I love it.
You saw me lean in, right?
Yes. This is your jam, I know. So, but what happens is when we see things that are outside of that box, it confuses our brain. It even frustrates it a bit, right? Because wait a minute, that's not what it's supposed to be. So what's an example of that? Barack Obama, Black president. Your brain is like, oh, wait, no, Black men are supposed to be, violent and thugs and, et cetera. Or we hear about, I was reading recently about this child who has the highest IQ in the United States, and it's a Black child. And it goes against everything in your brain that's saying Black people are somehow less intelligent. Mm-hmm. Or you see this young, Black boy teenage boy with dreads and a hoodie on who just got accepted to every Ivy League. And your brain is like, no, we're supposed to be afraid of him, right? He's supposed to be a threat. And the more you begin to introduce those things and see those things, your boxes, the lines begin to blur a little, right? You begin to have multiple references for things. And so that helps us just to kind of change our view about things. And that's true in the workplace also. If you hire Black leaders and people in the company see Black people as leaders in the company, talking about business, sharing their experiences, then that's everyday Black excellence. When you have an opportunity to bring in a speaker or a subject matter expert on a certain topic, go out of your way and be conscious about bringing Black folks in too, so people see them as authorities in whatever that discipline is. Even ensuring, as you do an intern, if you're doing an intern program, slot half of those slots for students from Hispanic serving institutions and HBCUs. You are giving this students who are not from that background an opportunity to meet folks and like form other references, but you're also elevating Black excellence. And this is why I just think it's so very important for us to do. The last thing I'm going to say on this is sometimes when I would talk about this, people will say, well, if you're just specifically highlighting Black excellence, or if you're hiring a subject matter expert and you're saying you want to make sure you bring Black folks in, isn't that somehow, not celebrating white excellence, or somehow hurting a male person or a white male? And what I just want to remind you is that we have the privilege of seeing white excellence every day, all day. When your CEO stands up in front of the company, when we watch television and all of the awards are going to the person who has done, we get to see this every day, and that's fantastic. We're saying we need the same thing for marginalized folks. If you start seeing us as much as you see white, as much as you see male, etc., then again, these boxes get slurred and it just becomes an everyday thing. So it doesn't have to take away from one to add to the other. But I think that it's super essential.
I love this. And I mean, I hope that all of y'all are taking notes or writing things down. Same deal. I feel like I just got a mini training on bias and it was so good. And I think, Dionna, also something that is so important that you mentioned is also the generational impact that has as well, right? And I think that that's something that's so important in the workplace and outside of the workplace. But not only how are we as adults unlearning that and relearning what Black excellence can look like, but then also how are our kids, nieces, nephews, whoever you have in your life, but the next generation really being able to say like, oh, I also see Black leaders, and that's something that's normalized, There's a lot.
Such a big difference. I always think about my younger kid, well, they're teenagers now, but the first president they remember is Barack Obama. So it's not an odd thing for them. And many of their friends, also, they happen to go to a school where sometimes they're the only person in their class, or they, are not. And this is what the kids have grown up that way. And if you think about all of the years and all of the images and all of the negative things that we have to undo, what a gift we give to our children to introduce this early. And so what does that mean? It means being conscious about the books you buy. So when you were buying children's books, I have a 21-month-old, and he's got a whole bookshelf that's 3 shelves full of books that are full of Black characters. So they're out there. He has books that have Hispanic, that are characters that are written in Spanish. LGBTQ, veterans, the military. It's all about just early exposure, and this just becomes normal. And having conversations with them about what's right and what's wrong. Having conversations that, now that we have this push about critical race theory, and I won't get on that soapbox, but we can't erase this. These are things that actually happen, right? And so when you deal with it head on, and especially when I think about it, talk to parents, white parents of white children who are like, I don't want my child to feel less than, to feel like this is their history is negative or impact. I'm like, well, we've kind of had to deal with that like our whole lives. Doesn't mean that I want you to, but the fact of the matter is like history is history. And depending on how you share it, it's a way for us to learn from the mistakes of our ancestors, et cetera. But yes, totally agree. This is not just for us. This is something that bleeds into your entire existence, to your children, to your nieces, to your nephews, teachers who are figuring out ways to bring this stuff in the classroom that we didn't really necessarily have the privilege of having, right? And so it's just essential that we make this a normal part of life.
I love this. I love this on so many levels. And Dionna, I want to touch on something that you had just shared of erasure, right? And I think you were talking about erasing of history, et cetera, and also of that being part of people's identities and where they come from as well, right? Let's bring it back to the workplace. But before I do that, for those of you who are listening right now, if you have any questions for Dionna, if anything's coming up, things you want to share, definitely drop them in the chat and we'll be sure to answer some of these questions. So Dionna, I'd love to hear from you. What are some of the loopholes, right, that we feel like the current system displays when it comes to inclusivity and equity of the Black community, specifically in professional spaces?
Yeah, so there are several. I'll just I'll just kind of highlight two of them. One of the ones that I've seen probably the most in corporations has been in reference to compensation and just career progression opportunities. So what does that look like? Now there are a lot of companies that do comp analysis. And it's, you know, very important to them that as they are like once a year, twice a year, making sure women, those from marginalized groups, et cetera, are being paired fairly in comparison to their colleagues. The problem though that I see is that those are they're data driven, which, you know, most analytics are. But what we're not looking at is the fact that oftentimes those from backgrounds that are traditionally excluded are misleveled. They're brought in at lower levels. So you may have two people that have like the exact same amount of experience. They are both considered experts in their expertise. You know, one comes in here, the other comes here, maybe 2 levels above, maybe because they were a referral, maybe they've had more opportunities to showcase their work, whatever it may be. And so now you have they're misleveled to begin with. Obviously, the person here's comp is going to also demonstrate that. And so you've literally, this person, it may take them 4 to 5 years to get to the level of this person and to the comp of this. So we've literally, you know, set this person back years, not to mention that when you're doing a comp analysis, that's not going to come up because we usually compare across levels, right? At all the managers, all the folks that have been here X amount. And so we've got to realize that it's more to it than that. And so I think looking at leveling is one of those areas. I know at Thumbtack, you know, this is something we're very aware of. So in addition to the data, we are also having conversations about how we ensure that people are, you know, leveled appropriately. And you know, empowering people to push back early on in the process. It's always harder to fix this later, right? If you can do this right when folks are coming in. And being sure though, not to punish the, you know, the person who overqualified. Well, we don't want to put them in this role so they miss out on an opportunity instead of leveling it, putting it where it should be so they can come add value to your company. Like we've got to think and not be so processed and like sometimes you've got to go outside of the rules or the process when you're trying to make things equitable. And I think some companies are missing that.
I love that, Dionna. And you're also bringing up a really good point, which is like the human aspect of it, right? I think a lot of the times, especially when we think about it's like numbers, quotas, how are we reaching all of these goals instead of being able to say, but who are the humans behind this that we're trying to serve and bring equitable access to, you know what I mean? Yeah. And I want to pause for a moment because I think a really interesting part of what I was processing. You shared a lot of good information.
I know how you work. We're good.
Like, let's talk about it. You mentioned a couple of different things. One was being able to start that conversation early, right? Which I think is spot on. But it also brings me to the conversation of like folks also feeling comfortable advocating for themselves and doing that early on, yes. Right?
Yes.
Psychological safety. Let's bring, well, I mean, 2 things, right? Psychological safety, also unlearning, also hyping ourselves up without feeling like we're doing the most or not doing enough, you know?
Love it.
But, I mean, I want to hear from you just when we think about psychological safety as a whole, we know that it's crucial. And so what are some practical insights to really try to ensure psychological safety for employees, especially those who come from historically marginalized backgrounds?
Absolutely. You know, one of the things I have always kind of been really just huge on is that I often think when companies think about DEI or doing diversity, equity, inclusion well, so much of the emphasis is on recruitment. And though recruitment is essential, we want to bring people to our companies. It's like, that's the cusp of their like experience. The other 99.99% of their experience at that company is going to be what happens once they start. And for some reason, that is the part that oftentimes is not well thought out, right? So we're not thinking about development and we're not thinking about having check-ins and mentors and, you know, all of these other things. And so psychological safety to me me is the most important part. If you say you are have a program or you want to make sure everyone feels like they belong and inclusivity, without psychological safety, none of that is possible. Let's just say that. And so what does psychological safety mean? It's becoming a bit buzzwordy, which always worries me. So I just want to dig in really quickly. So what it means as a leader is like taking time to actually get to know your employees. It means taking a genuine interest, right? Not like you're running down a list because you're, kind of jotting down what you might, no, really genuine interest in what makes them tick, what they're excited about, what their aspirations are. Not to the point where you're pushy if they don't want to open up, because, some of us, we've been through some stuff. And so we're not always completely open either. And sometimes our guards are up, we're dealing with trauma from the workplace, and so sometimes our guard, and so we have to mutually, and that's where the genuineness comes. Because if you have a genuine interest in a person, you understand that you're not trying to force them to share, right? But you want them to feel comfortable sharing. And the way you make them feel comfortable doing that is by being open about yourself. Share your background, what's interesting you. It's not a one-sided conversation. The number one thing to make people feel psychologically safe is when it's a person that you feel like and who genuinely cares about you, right? Has an interest in you. And so I think that's huge. Really quickly to others, being transparent. When my team knows, and Sienna, hopefully you can remember this too, there are some things I do great and there's some things that I'm awful at. And I will tell you like straight up from the beginning, hey, this is just not my thing. It's not an excuse not to develop it and get better at it, but I'm just being I want to be upfront, and I also want to create an environment where people feel comfortable telling me what is not their thing, right? Or where they struggle, because if you do that, you're able to fill those holes and those gaps. Without it, we're all running around trying to pretend like we're perfect, missing opportunities to like grow and develop. Or even on my team, I hire to fill gaps in our team, right? And so again, I think just being transparent, leaders that I've had who have been open and transparent to me, it's allowed me to do the same. If they don't, because I'm following their lead, right? That's how, like, when you're initiating, unfortunately, the way we've been brought up with this like hierarchical way of building relationships, you look for the teacher or the leader or whoever, you're kind of following their lead. So if you do it, then they will do it. And again, all of these things are just essential. And then the last thing I'm going to say about psychological safety is having people's back. If you have an employee who makes a mistake and they speak up, you go into that meeting and you have their back and you let them know that this was an error on you're not pointing to the person, you're helping them fix it because you realize, meeting is coming up, but you have their back and they know that you have their back. And so all of those things, sometimes when you're dealing with marginalized folks, again, you have to keep in mind that many of us have always felt outside of the norm. We've always felt like an outsider. We've had experiences where people have said things, microaggressions, or they treated us a certain way, and we carry that with us, right? Many of us now, as we're embracing therapy, are like working on getting rid of that so we can grow and prosper. But psychological safety it's important for every employee, but for your marginalized employees, it is essential. Without it, there is no inclusion and there is no belonging.
Let's take a moment to let that sit in, right? Dionna, thank you. We're not done yet, y'all. We're not done yet. But I mean, I think that's something that's so important to talk about when we think about psychological safety as a whole. Just from what we heard from Dionna, there's so many different aspects to that, right? But again, just thinking about, and I want to challenge all of us, right? What is something that you can do this week to build a more psychologically safe space, right? Dionna just gave us a ton of ideas, right? If you've been taking notes, you can kind of reference those or watch the recordings afterwards, but what's one thing you can commit to, okay? So we have about 6 minutes left. Dionna, I would love to just hear from you. And again, if y'all have questions, definitely feel free to send them in. But what are some ways, kind of along the same path of psychological safety, but more so around inclusivity, right? But what are some ways where we can foster a sense of inclusivity and also a sense of sensitivity towards individuals from historically marginalized communities to help really build up, yes, company goals, but then also company values, right? Of being able to say, what is the company mission and how are we all working towards that? And really, again, elevating folks, their zone of genius, like how you spoke about earlier, what are folks' zone of genius? And also how do their identity feed into that as well? Because I think that that's something that we miss a lot of the times. It's like, what are you great at? But then also, what can you bring to the table just by being you know? So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I love that. So, some of the obvious things that I think a lot of companies are focused on are employee resource groups is a great way, right? And so creating groups of people who have a similar background as well as allies, right, who are part of these groups. A couple of things I think is important is that when you do have, everyone should be welcome to join ERG. I think it's a great place to learn, et cetera. But I do also think that within that, it's important to have safe space for the employees that actually identify to whatever that group is, right? So that they still are finding their safe place. An example of that at Thumbtack, our we call them noble taxes, our Black employees. And just to show you how employees are so allyship is huge at Thumbtack. And so literally 95% of our Noble Tag members are not Black. And so, it could easily become where we're just focusing on allyship if we're looking at like the membership, but we do have a separate, even in Slack, group for the specific Black employees. And we are talking about whatever, sharing, we were just talking about Kendrick Lamar and sharing whatever and doing whatever we need in our safe space too. So I think that that's important. Having an open dialogue, ensuring your managers are developing as inclusive leaders. And that can be a separate training usually in the beginning, but it should be woven into every training you do for people leaders is this inclusivity and what it looks like and psychological safety. And then the last thing I'm going to say, just the way we measure it. This stuff can't be a checklist. This can't be a checklist. We have to have ways. You can say you have a very inclusive and belonging environment, but you haven't talked to any of the LGBTQIA community or us or Latinos or Latinx. We haven't talked to anyone. So how do you know that? So I think, using things like your engagement surveys or additional surveys, having focus groups, coming to ERG meetings and getting feedback and talking to people, as well as looking at retention, promotions, looking at rating trends. And so there's a number of things that we can look at, and that's where that accountability, like I said, we're moving from awareness to action, but you have to have that accountability piece. And once we really encompass that, then it also will let us know what we're doing well and inform where we need to pivot and change. So I think it's just really essential to bring all those things together.
I love that. And like another quick call to action, if we're ready for some 2.0 stuff, right? For all of you who are in the audience, Dionna brought up a really amazing point of also being able to say, when we're looking at data, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, how are we also making sure that we're highlighting the data from our historically marginalized groups, right? Because again, a lot of the times you're like, we're doing fantastic with this, but you break down that data and it's like, oh, but the people we're trying to serve, not so much. Again, there's so many reports that have been coming out about all of these DEI programs that aren't actually having impact because intent versus impact is different. Hold on, we're getting in a question. We have about 2 minutes left. So I want to have Jay's question be shared. Ooh, things are popping in. Y'all, you're coming in a little bit late. But it's the last 2 minutes, right? I know.
Let's see how long-winded I am. I don't know how this is going to work out, but let's try.
I know, right? Okay, so Dionna, really quickly, someone said, Jay Brown, hey, analytics oversaturates the framework of the job search. I feel like numbers have taken over. How do you go beyond the data to develop authentic relationships with potential hires and staff?
Yeah, that's super important. Data has definitely taken on. Look, we work for corporations and business, and that's how they run every other aspect of the business. I think as DEI leaders, we have to push. So we need quantitative data. So being able to provide that, but we've got to be comfortable, and that's where that psychological safety comes in, pushing when we don't fit in the perfect box, and I've had to explain this, at companies, et cetera, too. So I think pushing back on not just the data and ensuring that you are making it human if you're in a role that is allowing you to influence that.
That was beautiful. That was beautiful. That was succinct. I was like, I just took down notes. Dionna, I know that we have 1 minute left. I just want to say it is an honor. I speak for myself, PowerToFly, everyone watching right now, to just learn from you, to hear from you and hear your perspective and point of view. Where can we reach out? Where can we find you? How can we keep up to date with all of the amazing work and impact that you're having.
Awesome, thank you. So probably the best place is on LinkedIn. So post pretty frequently, and I would love to connect with folks there. Also, Thumbtack, following Thumbtack, we are sharing a lot of the programming and a lot of success that we're having on our LinkedIn, our Instagram, Twitter, et cetera. So I think that that's a great place also to follow the progress that we're making. So once again, PowerToFly, thank you so much for having me. I love this, and I've learned a lot just having the conversations, and through the questions, you made me think about some things I haven't thought about in a while.
The honor is ours, Dionna. Thank you so much.